What's going on, guys? Aaron, Clough-Real Realtor here, and want to talk to you about something that's been on my mind that you may have seen in the news over the past several months, especially as we've seen housing prices go up and up and up, is the idea that big banks are buying up all the houses. It started off with Zillow when they were going through, and Zillow went out and purchased a massive amount of real estate, specifically in the single family market, and was claimed first that Zillow was the boogeyman, the bad guy that was buying up all these houses and making houses more expensive for everyday people like me and you. We did see that Zillow made a massive mistake in having to write off, I should say, 2.8 billion with a B as far as losses for those acquisitions, and shut down different pieces of their business and going back to marketing and data analytics. But there's still been a lot of things in the news about some of the bigger institutional investors, big investment banks, things like that are the boogeyman of the situation. Unfortunately, while that's easy to point the finger and blame, it may just not necessarily be the case. Now, there's no doubt with rising home prices and things like that we have seen over the past few years that the number of rental units, specifically in single family, has gone up and up and up, especially with the big push after COVID of people wanting to move out of, say, apartment complexes or multifamily communities and get houses, but unable to afford or purchase at that time. So where it gets a little bit complicated or a little bit tricky is when you dive into the numbers. Not that it's hard to figure out, but more that when you look at the overall numbers of the rental units that are owned, or the single family rental units that are owned, the individual owner, the everyday guy or gal that owns 1, 2, 3, 4 units, maybe their previous homes, maybe they bought it off a deal off their cousin, maybe they bought it out of foreclosure. A lot of different strategies there. They actually make up about 70 to 75%, depending on the numbers that you look at, 75% of the owners of single family rentals. Now, when I say single family, that can in fact mean everything up to 4 units, at least as we define it here in the state of Texas. But you look at investment banks and the big institutional players, they own about 6%. And so you look at it, it's almost 10x that's owned by the individuals over those investment banks. Now, there's no doubt that investment banks and the big institutional investors like life insurance companies, pension funds, things like that, you've actually seen some multi-billion-dollar partnerships over the past few months, really dating back to about mid-2021. Showing that they are geared and they are in fact trying to buy single family homes. Now, why is this? Number one, real estate is a great investment opportunity or great investment alternative to necessarily stocks and bonds for a number of reasons. But one of the reasons is massive inflation. We are seeing inflation higher than we've seen in the past 40 years. And so trying to hedge against inflation, real estate has always been a fantastic hedge, especially when there's enough demand driving people to rental markets where they can capture more rental income, the tax deferments, things like that. Now, another reason is they're having to reallocate or repurpose some portfolios away from certain commercial real estate assets. Obviously, we've all, if you've worked in an office or you've worked for a large company or even a small company, you've seen since 2020, your day looks probably very different. Things like office building, retail, industrial, commercial, even multifamily, malls, things like that. All of those assets have seen a pretty big dip. Now, multifamily has stayed pretty strong in some markets, including Dallas-Fort Worth, leading both in production and absorption, which means how many people are actually leasing those properties up. But when they've invested heavily in things like office buildings or industrial parks or some of those retail centers, with COVID, with the shutdowns, with how the new normal was, they pushed out of those sectors and got into something that people wanted, which are houses. The other thing is with that inflation, the rising cost of materials, labor, management, things like that, single family homes became a great alternative. Now, the other piece of that, and what really feeds into that 72 to 75%, is the everyday Joe and Jill like me and you. Now, I bought my house in 2018, and so even think back if someone bought their house even earlier than this, people over the past couple of years, with the massive amount of appreciation that we've seen in single family homes across the country, have picked up quite a bit of equity. For example, the average home in the United States, or the average appreciation over the past year, has been about 18.8%. We will call that 18%, no big deal. So if you look at the average, let's say you're talking about a $300,000 home, pretty standard median income or median home price for a lot of markets in the United States. If you bump that up $18,000, In 1 year, that homeowner gained $54,000 in equity for just owning that property. Now, you obviously have debt servicing. You've got to pay for things to be improved. You have to make sure it stays up to market conditions. But if they've owned that for a couple of years and it's been double-digit year-over-year growth, they have plenty of equity built up. So where the alternative was where you sold that property and then went and used the proceeds of that to go purchase a new home, what a lot of people are doing is, since their 401ks maybe have not been performing, or IRAs or some of those other traditional investment sources, landlording or owning real estate has become a great option, especially if you have the equity to pull out to go purchase your next home, your dream home, and then rent that out. Now you combine that with the fact that the rental market has gone crazy and the prices are higher and higher for rents, driving that up. It has created kind of a whirlwind for those renters, and a really, really enticing opportunity both for the individual investor as well as those big institutional companies. So I know that BlackRock, I know that a lot of the big banks get the boogeyman status, or they are the bad guy, but it's not necessarily the case. Now we'll see over the next coming months, especially as we're expecting to see inflation go even higher, of what that looks like and how people pivot against that, but that's still to be seen. So if you're wondering who owns the houses, who's buying them up, maybe don't point the finger at the investment trust and maybe look to your neighbor next door. So nerded out a little bit. Hope it's helpful. Hope I have some sort of guidance there. Like, share, would appreciate it. Y'all be good.